Well, I've just listened to your introduction about Aves and what it is claiming is happening in Syria, what its emphasis is, what it is not mentioning, and it could come straight off the pages of the neocon operations in the United States, like the Project The New American Century, which put out a document in September 2000 calling for regime change in Iraq and Libya and Syria and Lebanon and Iran and North Korea, leading to regime change in China. And of course, what Avaz is pushing and the line that it's pushing and the propaganda that it's pushing is exactly what that network wants. Because you see, there's two things that go on in terms of a war. You have a physical war, but then you have to justify the physical war, and that's by the war on perception. And so organizations like Avaz and, of course, the White Helmets that actually sing from the same song sheet are pushing out the propaganda, particularly to the young in Avaz's case, to tens of millions of members now, to sell regime change after regime change. Remember, it was Avaz that was pushing for the no-fly zone in Libya, which has turned Libya ultimately into a catastrophe. It then was pushing for the no-fly zone in Syria, see the same. And so this list of regime changes have been very clearly supported at every step by this organization, and we should therefore have massive questions about it. If you look at the guy who runs it, Riken Patel, he's been an advisor to the UN, to the Rockefeller Foundation, to the Gates Foundation, and to the International Crisis Group, which has Soros and these other globalists as trustees. And of course, Avaz was created by MoveOn.org and an organization called Res Republica, both of which are George Soros funded. And Soros is now infamous for using his Open Society Foundation network to trigger, quote, revolutions to remove the very people and regimes that were on that list in September 2000. Well, I've been saying in my books and my talks for, beyond a decade and more that the plan is for the manipulation of a third world war between the West and Russia, China, with Iran thrown in. And it's a simple process of understanding the world. Once you know where something is planned to go, once you know what the outcome is planned to be, then the steps towards that outcome become very clear day by day by day. For instance, once you knew the outcome from the Project The New American Century in September 2000 was regime changes in those countries, then as the different excuses came up to invade those countries and start civil wars in those countries, you could read it because you knew what the outcome was, so you're seeing the stepping stone towards it. Now, if you want a conflict with Russia, which has been the plan all along, then of course, if that's the outcome, you have to demonize Russia to prepare the global public to accept your outcome. This is why NATO forces are constantly building up on Russia's borders. This is why, as I said on the internet last week, Vladimir Putin must be an absolute genius because he's apparently responsible for everything. And so you look at the claims that Russia actually manipulated and caused Trump to win in the American election. You look at what's happening in Salisbury with the nerve agent attack. You look at what's happening in Syria. These are just excuses after excuses. I mean, Russia apparently manipulated the Brexit vote. I mean, what else? I burnt the toast. It's the Russians. I've got a flat. It's the Russians. It's become that ludicrous because what we're looking at is a global propaganda campaign to demonize Russia, to prepare the global public to accept the outcome they're going towards and wish to happen. Well, of course, fake news has many faces. One face is the mainstream Western media, which has been absolutely founded, and even more so than ever before now, on faking information and misleading the public as to what is happening, and particularly the context of what is happening. And then you have the alleged fake news, which is what Facebook and Google and the mainstream in general are using as an excuse to censor alternative narratives. And that is invariably not fake news, but simply looking at a situation from an angle that the global establishment, because it is a global network, doesn't want people to see the world in that fashion. They only want to see them to see the way that they wish them to view the world. It's very simple. If you are after controlling perception, which is what this is all about, this is what Avaz is all about, white helmets are all about, and all this other stuff, then where do people get perceptions from? From information received. It could be a personal experience, it could be the 10 o'clock news. For most people, that information comes from the equivalent of the 10 o'clock news, the mainstream media. Now, if you're going to control perception, you have to control the information received that are going to lead to that perception. The last thing you want is people coming from another angle and saying, hold on, in the words, what was it of Theresa May over the Salisbury incident? There's no alternative to seeing it this way. Well, of course, there's endless alternatives to seeing it that way. But when you're trying to control perception, you don't want people having access to other ways of looking at something, only yours. This is why we're having the attacks on Russia today in Britain and calls for it to be banned and deleted. This is why YouTube channels of alternative thinkers and alternative journalists are being taken down without any excuse whatsoever on an increasingly large scale. It's to dominate the information that people receive, thus to control their perceptions of reality. And that's why you've had this demonization of Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, the opposition Labour Party leader, for having the absolute audacity last week to ask for evidence to support the claim that the Russian government was involved in that attack. He was jeered not only by the opposition to him Conservative Party, but by many of his own party. And we are now living in a post-fact, post-evidence society, and that is because you control the information people receive, you invariably control the perceptions they come to. Well, her words were close to the fact there is no alternative to the conclusion. And I think that, in fact, they were her exact words. There is no alternative to the conclusion of Russia's involvement. And of course, there are endless other possibilities. Well, I think calls to stop the World Cup are an absolute joke. But then again, as you've indicated, joke and politicians tend to appear in the same sentence quite often. It it is an absolute joke, and it's ludicrous. But you see, it's part of this demonization. I mean, who else? Coming back to how we started this conversation, who else is calling for the World Cup to be banned in Russia? Avaz. These are different strands in the same web that want to give the impression that they're operating in isolation. They are not. They are pushing an agenda which is coordinated, and anything that can upset Russia, that can demonize Russia, that can cause Russia problems, is anything goes now. But you know what I feel, and I'm on this all the time, every day, and I talk to a lot of people and I meet a lot of people. What's very, very encouraging in Britain, particularly from my experience, is that those that dominate the microphones with their hysteria and their nonsense and their lack of evidence and their lack of sanity, they are speaking one language. But large numbers of the British people are speaking another language. You see, if you are so desperate, for instance, to demonize Russia, you can overcook the pot, and they've overcooked the pot, and people now in increasing numbers are not buying it. And the more that what's coming out of Russia, and it does through Sergei Lavrov, particularly, I think, a calm, evidence-based response, the more this hysteria is becoming counterproductive. Well, the thing is that, Western journalists, well, mainstream journalists in general, are nothing more overwhelmingly. There are honourable exceptions, and a round of applause for those in a very difficult situation. But they're basically public relations operatives for the official version of everything. You have a situation where they were lied to absolutely blatantly over weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, lied to from both sides of the Atlantic. But by the way, the official story of 9/11 was given to us, which the media accepted 100%, by the very same people that told us the lies about Iraq. How you can be lied to openly on one and believe everything they say about another is quite another story. But even just leaving Iraq in isolation, they say, oh, we were lied to, Tony Blair, all this. But the next time the same scam is being played, you have the same reaction. There's no, for years, decades in my books, I've been talking about a technique of mass perception manipulation that I call problem, reaction, solution. You want to make changes in the world, or you want to justify an invasion or a bombing, but you can't just do it. You've got to have an excuse for it. So you create a problem covertly, or blame someone for a problem who didn't do it, and then you sell that the reason for that problem to the public via what we're discussing now, an unquestioning, pathetic mainstream media, who simply take the official version of that problem and report it to the public unquestioned, unresearched. And you're looking at stage 2 in problem, reaction, solution for a reaction from the public, fear, outrage, whatever, to give you the opportunity to go to stage 3, which is to openly offer the solutions to the problems you've created. Now, I've just described, of course, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, because there is another version of this that I call no problem, reaction, solution, where you don't need a real problem, just the perception of one. That was the WMD. And of course, problem, reaction, solution has been tried now, 3 times in Syria, by trying to blame Assad for chemical weapons attacks on, quote, his own people, when there is absolutely no benefit for Assad doing that. In fact, absolutely the opposite, because he's intelligent enough to realize that the West, particularly America, are looking for any excuse to send the boys in, literally. So these problem, reaction, solution events are very, very easy to spot now. But the mainstream media just keeps going with them. And again, let's come back to the start of the interview. Avaz, what are they doing? Again and again, every time there is a Western propaganda suggestion that Assad has used chemical weapons on, quote, his own people, Avaz is in there with its tens of millions of supporters pushing petitions condemning Assad and condemning Russia. Now, I'm not, an apologist for Russia. I've got things that I question about everybody. But the fact is, and that is the point, if we're going to be proper journalists who are based on facts, then let's see the facts. But once you got dealing in facts in this whole area of demonization of Russia and Assad, then the propaganda falls down, which is why facts are of no relevance to these people.